about that over the last couple of days in light of the White House policy on choosing not to deport now young people who they deem to be successful migrants to the country. Lee asks, how do you feel about the DREAM Act?
Well, once again, I think that the DREAM Act...
You can find the rest of this conversation online as we take you live now to the floor of the U.S. House. Members taking up 9 bills under suspension of the rules.
Rule 20. Recorded votes on postponed questions will be taken later in the day. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 1556.
Clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 206, H.R. 1556, a bill to amend the Omnibus Indian Advancement Act to allow certain land to be used to generate income to provide funding for academic programs and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Hastings, and the gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Lujan, each will control 20 minutes, and the chair recognizes the gentleman from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on the bill under consideration.
Without objection.
I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Santa Fe Indian School in Santa Fe, New Mexico, established in the late 1800s, is a federal off-reservation boarding school for the 19 Pueblo governors of New Mexico. On December 20th, 2000, Public Law 106-568 transferred 115 acres of property to the school with certain limitations. H.R. 1556 would allow the Santa Fe Indian School to use its 115 acres of land for economic development. The bill retained the prohibition on Indian gambling on the transferred land. I urge adoption of the measure, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Third gentleman from New Mexico.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Yes.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank Chairman Hastings, Chairman Young, Ranking Member Markey, and Ranking Member Bourne for working with me in the Natural Resources Committee to help address the many issues impacting Indian country and the tribes I represent in New Mexico. I also want to recognize the hard work of the Superintendent of Santa Fe Indian School and former Governor of Chippewa and Santo Domingo Pueblo, Everett Chavez, former AIPC President and former NCIA President Joe Garcia on this bill. They worked with the Pueblos and the All-Indian Pueblo Council to support this legislation, which will help Santa Fe Indian School and New Mexico's 19 Pueblos achieve educational sovereignty for Native American students across New Mexico. Santa Fe Indian School and the 19 Pueblos approached my office early last year seeking the introduction of a technical change to the Omnibus Indian Advancement Act to allow certain lands designated to the school to be used to generate income to provide funding for academic and cultural programs at the Indian School. Knowing the importance of what Santa Fe Indian School provides to Native American students in New Mexico, I was very interested in this approach to move forward through true financial independence and educational sovereignty for Santa Fe Indian School and its students. I want to point out the importance of sovereignty and what it means for our tribal brothers and sisters to be able to provide a quality education for their own children. Education is truly empowering, especially when Native American students are able to get an education that embraces their cultural and traditional identities. And that is the type of education Santa Fe Indian School provides. I worked with Superintendent Chavez and Santa Fe Indian School to draft a bill that would make a technical amendment to allow the school to explore economic opportunities so that the students in the Indian School can attain the best possible education and to be able to support their mission. Santa Fe Indian School provides a challenging, stimulating, and nurturing learning environment that shares educational responsibility with Native communities, parents, students, to develop the students' true potential to meet obligations to themselves and their tribal communities. In this time of financial uncertainty and the limitations of the federal government to assist in federal education programs, it is so important to give Santa Fe Indian School the tools they need to help their students receive a quality education, regardless of the political and financial climate in Washington. H.R. 1556 would achieve that goal, and I am proud to be able to assist Santa Fe Indian School in amending the Omnibus Indian Advancement Act to allow the school to achieve new heights in educating Native American students. This technical amendment will help make Santa Fe Indian School more self-sufficient and create greater opportunities for students attending the Indian School by ensuring the financial capability to maintain and expand the level of academic and cultural education for Native American students. This is a common-sense bill that will help Native American students in New Mexico, and I urge the support of my colleagues, and I thank the chairman for his support as well, and I yield back my time.
Chairman yields back. Gentleman from Washington.
I urge adoption of the bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 1556? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington rise?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 4027.
Clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 357, H.R. 4027, a bill to clarify authority granted under the Act entitled An Act to Define the Exterior Boundary of the Uintah and Ouray Indian Reservation in the State of Utah and for other purposes.
Chair will receive a message.
Mr. Speaker, a message from the President of the United States. Mr. Speaker,
Madam Secretary.
I am directed by the President of the United States to deliver to the House of Representatives messages in writing.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Hastings, and the gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Lujan, each will control 20 minutes, and the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks on and insert extraneous materials on the bill under consideration.
Without objection.
I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, H.R. 4027 is a bipartisan bill that would clarify the boundaries of the Uintah and Ouray Indian Reservation as passed by the Hill Creek Extension of 1948. The bill would authorize the Utah School and Industrial Trust Land Administration to relinquish to the Ute Indian tribe its subsurface mineral rights in exchange for subsurface rights to an equal number of acres of other land owned by the federal government. The exchange would allow the school trust fund and the tribe to explore additional oil and gas development that will help support the Utah education and create jobs for the tribe while preserving more culturally sensitive land for the tribe. I urge adoption of the resolution. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserved. Gentleman from New Mexico.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, H.R. 4027 clarifies existing law regarding the federal government's authority to permit land exchanges within the boundaries of the Ute Indian Reservation in northeastern Utah and resolve the tribe's split estate problem caused by federal error over 50 years ago. This legislation returns the subsurface mineral estate to the Ute tribe and portion of its reservation that the tribe considers culturally and environmentally significant and thus preserves the area's pristine wilderness from development. The bill also benefits the state of Utah by opening up federal minerals for development in an area of the tribe's reservation already being developed by the tribe's energy company. Legislation that corrects a federal error and satisfies both tribal and state interests without cost to the federal government does not come along very often. Mr. Matheson is to be commended for his dedication to seeing this bill pass out of the House and for crafting a workable solution to a difficult problem. I urge my colleagues to support H.R. 4027, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserved. Gentleman from Washington.
I reserve my time.
Gentleman reserved. Gentleman from New Mexico.
Mr. Speaker, I yield such time as he may consume to the gentleman from Utah. Mr. Matheson.
Gentleman from Utah.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of H.R. 4027, which is a bill to authorize an acre-for-acre exchange of subsurface mineral lands within the Hill Creek Extension between the state of Utah and the United States on behalf of the Ute tribe. And I really want to thank Chairman Hastings and his staff, and also Subcommittee Chairman Young and his staff, Ranking Member Markey and his staff, and Ranking Member Bourne and his staff, for their support in moving this bill through the Natural Resources Committee. I'd also like to thank my colleague from Utah, Mr. Bishop, who is a co-sponsor of the bill. In the transaction authorized in this bill, the tribe would acquire certain state minerals in Grand County, Utah, and in exchange, the BLM would relinquish certain federal lands in Uintah County, Utah, to the state. This bipartisan bill would give the BLM the authority to approve this transaction that was first proposed several years ago. In order to fully protect state and federal interests, this legislation reserves identical overriding financial interests in each other's exchange lands should development occur. Often in the past, these land exchanges have challenges with appraisal and making sure everyone's treated fairly. This legislation tries to address that issue looking forward. This bill is a win-win. It helps the Tribe consolidate its management of land that is considered sacred and culturally significant, and at the same time, it allows for domestic energy development on land not considered environmentally sensitive that would provide more school trust fund revenue for Utah and employment for energy workers in the state as well. This legislation has broad support from local government, including Grand, Duchesne, and Uintah counties, the state of Utah, and the Ute Tribe, as well as partner agencies. The Wilderness Society also testified in support of this legislation. So I urge my colleagues to join me in passing this bill. Thank you, and I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Chairman yields back. Gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, if the gentleman has no more requests for time.
Gentleman from New Mexico.
Mr. Speaker, we thank the gentleman from Utah for his hard work, and we yield back the balance of his time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Washington.
And I urge adoption and yield back the balance of my time.
Question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 4027? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass S. 404.
Clerk will report the title of the bill.
Senate 404, an act to modify a land grant patent issued by the Secretary of the Interior.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Hastings, and the gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Lujan, each will control 20 minutes, and the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend the remarks and include extraneous materials on the bill under consideration.
Without objection.
I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, S. 404 would simply modify a land patent that was issued by the Department of Interior to the Great Lakes Shipwreck Historical Society in 1998 to reflect an agreement between the Historical Society, the Michigan Audubon Society, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The current land patent references an outdated 1992 comprehensive plan for Whitefish Point, a 43-acre spit of land surrounded by Lake Superior. The Michigan Audubon Society sued when this plan for development was proposed, and following a court-ordered settlement of the lawsuit, a new plan was negotiated in 2002. This bill would modify the land patent to appropriately reference the 2002 plan and finally allow for the development to go forward. Congressman Dan Benishek, our colleague from Michigan, is the author of the companion House bill, H.R. 3411, and he should be commended for his common-sense approach to help manage this important tourism in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
I reserve gentleman from New Mexico.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, S. 404 requires the Secretary of the Interior to modify a land grant patent in Chippewa County, Michigan. The patent issued to the Michigan Audubon Society and the Great Lakes Shipwreck Historical Society will be amended to allow for use and modification of the property to allow for new use plants. We have no objections to this legislation, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserved. Gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to yield 3 minutes to the author of the companion bill in the House of this legislation, gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Benishek.
Gentleman from Michigan for 3 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, this evening the House will take up Senate Bill 404, a bill authored by my colleague in the Senate, Senator Carl Levin. As you heard, I authored a companion bill in the House last November. This bill will end a bureaucratic roadblock that has prevented the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum from making improvements to its facility located in Chippewa County, Michigan, along the southern shore of Lake Superior. Only an act of Congress is able to correct an error in the land patent that was enacted in 1992. From the bell of the Edmund Fitzgerald to the U.S. Coast Guard's Whitefish Point Lighthouse, the Shipwreck Museum exhibits tell the story of brave men and women who have navigated the Great Lakes for hundreds of years. This facility displays important parts of northern Michigan's history. Each year, some 60,000 individuals visit the museum and explore firsthand the rich maritime traditions of Michigan's 1st District. Preserving Michigan's maritime history is a resource that both Senator Levin and I agree warrants enthusiastic bipartisan support for the benefit of future generations of visitors. I want to thank Chairman Hastings for bringing this bill to the floor today, and encourage all my colleagues to support this measure and bring it one step closer to the President's desk. Thank you. I yield back the remainder of my time.
Gentleman from New Mexico.
Mr. Speaker, we have no other speakers, and we're prepared to yield back if Chairman so deems. Mr. Speaker, we yield back the balance of our time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Washington.
I urge adoption of S-404, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass Senate 404? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair,
Speaker.
two-thirds being in the affirmative, the
Speaker.
The gentleman from Washington.
The Speaker asks for the yeas and nays on this legislation.
The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote for the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having arisen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington rise?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass S-684.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Senate 684, an act to provide for the conveyance of certain parcels of land in the town of Alta, Utah.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Hastings, and the gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Lujan, each will control 20 minutes, and the chair recognizes the gentleman from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend the remarks and include extraneous material on the bill under consideration.
Without objection.
I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, S-684, introduced by Senator Mike Lee of Utah, would address a pressing issue in the town of Alta, Utah. Alta is a small ski town that currently operates most of its municipal infrastructure on land managed by the Wasatch Cache National Forest under a multitude of special use permits. This legislation would convey this land, a maximum of 2 acres, to a town to provide for certainty, simplicity, and flexibility in maintaining its facilities. I urge my colleagues to support this common sense bill, and I reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from New Mexico.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, S-684, sponsored by Senator Mike Lee of Utah, provides for the conveyance of no more than 2 acres of land from the Wasatch Cache National Forest to the town of Alta, Utah. The town of Alta has been built 2 facilities for public use on this government property under a special use permit. The town will be paying for all survey costs. We have no objection to this legislation, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserved. Gentleman from Washington.
I advise my friend I have no more requests for time, and I'm prepared to yield back to the gentleman is.
Gentleman New Mexico.
Mr. Speaker, we yield back the balance of our time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Washington.
I yield back the balance of my time and urge adoption of the resolution.
Question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass Senate 684? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative.
Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Washington.
The Speaker asks for the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having arisen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington rise?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass S-997.
Clerk will report the title of the bill.
Senate 997, an act to authorize the Secretary of the Interior to extend a water contract between the United States and the East Bench Irrigation District.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Hastings, and the gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Lujan, each will control 20 minutes, and the chair recognizes the gentleman from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the bill under consideration.
Without objection.
I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, S-997, the East Bench Irrigation District Water Contract Extension Act, extends a water contract between the United States and the East Bench Irrigation District in southwestern Montana until December 31st, 2013, or until a new contract can be executed. This bill allows for the continued irrigation of 28,000 acres of land, which is important to that area's economy. It also preserves the district's renewable rights while a local matter is adjudicated at the state level. The bill will not influence the outcome of state actions. S-997 is supported by our colleague from Montana, Congressman Dennis Rehberg, and by the administration, and I urge my colleagues to support this legislation, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from New Mexico.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, S-997 was introduced by Senator John Tester in May of last year and passed the Senate in November of 2011. As my colleague mentioned, S 997 would extend the East Bench Irrigation District's water contract for 4 years pending a judicial ruling. The administration has testified in support of S 997 because it would allow for water service to the district to continue and allows for contract renewal while the court confirmation process is given time to be completed. We thank Senator John Tester for his leadership, and we have no objections to this legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, I urge adoption of the legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass Senate 997? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. Chair lays before the House a message.
To the Congress of the United States, Section 202D of the National Emergency Act, 50 U.S.C. 1622D, provides for the automatic termination of a national emergency unless, within 90 days prior to the anniversary date of its declaration, the President publishes in the Federal Register and transmits to the Congress a notice stating that the emergency is to continue in effect beyond the anniversary date. In accordance with this provision, I have sent to the Federal Register for publication the enclosed notice stating that the national emergency declared in Executive Order 13466 of June 26, 2008, expanded in scope in Executive Order 13551 of August 30, 2010, and addressed further in Executive Order 13570 of April 18, 2011, is to continue in effect beyond June 26, 2012. The extensive and risk of proliferation of weapons-usable fissile material on the Korean Peninsula and the actions and policies of the government of North Korea that destabilize the Korean Peninsula and imperil U.S. armed forces, allies, and trading partners in the region continue to constitute an unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security, foreign policy, and economy of the United States. For these reasons, I have determined that it is necessary to continue the national emergency with respect to these threats and maintain and enforce the measures taken to deal with the national emergency. Signed, Barack Obama, the White House, June 18, 2012.
Referred to the Committee on Foreign Affairs and ordered printed. The lays before the House of Communication.
To the Congress of the United States, Section 202D of the National Emergency Act provides for the automatic termination of a national emergency unless, within 90 days prior to the anniversary date of its declaration, the President publishes in the Federal Register and transmits to the Congress a notice stating that the emergency is to continue in effect beyond the anniversary date. In accordance with this provision, I have sent to the Federal Register for publication the enclosed notice stating that the emergency declared in Executive Order 13159 of June 21, 2000, with respect to the risk of nuclear proliferation created by the accumulation of large volume of weapons-usable fissile material in the territory of the Russian Federation is to continue beyond June 21, 2012. It remains a major national security goal of the United States to ensure that fissile material removed from Russian nuclear weapons pursuant to various arms control and disarmament agreements is dedicated to the peaceful uses subject to transparency measures and protected from diversion to activities of proliferation concern. The accumulation of a large volume of weapons-usable fissile material in the territory of the Russian Federation continues to pose an unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security and foreign policy of the United States. For this reason, I have determined that it is necessary to continue the national emergency declared with respect to the risk of nuclear proliferation created by the accumulation of large volume of weapons-usable fissile material in the territory of the Russian Federation and maintain and enforce these emergency authorities to respond to this threat. Signed, Barack Obama, the White House, June 18, 2012.
Referred to the Committee on Foreign Affairs and ordered printed.
Joe Lloyd, I don't know what Chris wants to do.
from Texas and would ask for what purpose does he rise?
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and agree to House Resolution 683, expressing the regret of the House of Representatives for the passage of laws that adversely affected the Chinese in the United States, including the Chinese Exclusion Act.
The clerk will report the title of the resolution.
House Resolution 683, resolution expressing the regret of the House of Representatives for passage of laws that adversely affected the Chinese in the United States, including the Chinese Exclusion Act.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Smith, and the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Chu, each will control 20 minutes, and the chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on House Resolution 683 currently under consideration.
Without objection. Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I first want to thank the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Chu, for introducing H.Res. 683, expressing the regret of the House of Representatives for the passage of laws that adversely affected the Chinese in the United States, including the Chinese Exclusion Act. I know through conversations with several of my colleagues, including the ranking member of the Foreign Relations Committee, Mr. Berman, that this is an important resolution for them and their constituents. The resolution concerns laws passed by the House of Representatives that restricted the civil rights of certain individuals in the United States based solely on the ethnicity of those individuals. Specifically, during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Congress passed and presidents signed laws that restricted the rights of people of Chinese ethnicity. For instance, in March 1882, the House of Representatives passed the initial Chinese Exclusion Act that denied Chinese people the right to be naturalized as American citizens. And in April 1892, the House of Representatives passed the Gary Act, which reauthorized the Chinese Exclusion Act for 10 years and denied Chinese immigrants the right to be released on bail upon application for a writ of habeas corpus. Laws that deny certain civil rights to individuals legally in the United States are inconsistent with the values on which this country was founded. I thank the gentlewoman from California for working with me to refine the text of this resolution, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlewoman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of House Resolution 683. First, I want to thank Chairman Lamar Smith and Subcommittee Chair Trent Franks of the Judiciary Committee for all their work on this resolution. I appreciate it so much. We have come together across party lines to show that no matter what side of the aisle we sit on, Congress can make amends for the past, no matter how long ago those violations occurred. It is because we have worked together in a bipartisan way that we will make history today. Today, for the first time in 130 years, the House of Representatives will vote on a bill that expresses regret for the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, one of the most discriminatory acts in American history. Over a century ago, the Chinese came here in search of a better life. During the California Gold Rush, the Chinese came to the United States to make something of themselves. Their blood, sweat, and tears built the first transcontinental railroad connecting the people of our nation. They opened our mines, constructed the levees, and became the backbone of farm production. Their efforts helped build America. But as the economy soured in the 1870s, the Chinese became scapegoats. They were called racial slurs, were spat upon in the streets, and even brutally murdered. The harsh conditions they faced were evident in the halls of Congress. By the time 1882 came around, members of Congress were competing with each other to get the most discriminatory law passed and routinely made speeches on the House floor against the so-called Mongolian horde. Representative Albert Shelby Willis from Kentucky fought particularly hard for Chinese Exclusion Act. In his floor speech, he said the Chinese were an invading race. He called them aliens with sordid and unrepublican habits. He declared that the Pacific states had been cursed with the evils of Chinese immigration and that they disturbed the peace and order of society. The official House committee report accompanying the bill claimed that the Chinese, and I quote, retain their distinctive peculiarities and characteristics, refusing to assimilate themselves to our institutions and remaining a separate and distinct class entrenched behind immovable prejudices, that their ignorance or disregard of sanitary laws as evidenced in their habits of life breeds disease, pestilence, and death," unquote. And so, on April 17, 1882, under a simple suspension of the rules, the House passed the Chinese Exclusion Act. It prevented them from becoming naturalized citizens, it prevented them from ever having the right to vote, and it prevented the Chinese, and the Chinese alone, from immigrating. But this was only the beginning. As the years passed, the House built upon this act, increasing the discriminatory restrictions on the Chinese. 2 years later, the House made clear that any ethnically Chinese labor, even if they weren't from China, but from somewhere like Hong Kong or the Philippines, were banned from U.S. shores. 4 years later, the House passed the Scott Act. This bill prohibited all Chinese laborers from re-entering the United States if they ever left, even if they were legal residents in the U.S., and even if they had the certificates of return that should have guaranteed their right of return. This prevented approximately 20,000 legal U.S. residents who had gone abroad, including 600 on ships literally en route back to the United States, from returning to their families or their homes. With little floor debate, the Scott Act passed the House unanimously. In 1892, when the Chinese Exclusion Act was set to expire, the House extended it for another decade, but it increased restrictions further. It made the Chinese the only residents who could not receive bail after applying for a writ of habeas corpus, that is, to protest an unjust imprisonment. It made them the only people in America who had to carry papers or certificates of residence with them at all times. If they couldn't produce the proper documents, authorities threw them into prison or out of the country, regardless of whether they were U.S. citizens or not. Legally, the only means by which this could be stopped is if a white person testified on their behalf. In 1898, the U.S. annexed Hawaii and the Philippines, making them U.S. territories. And while other residents of the territories could come and go between their home and the U.S., who did the House make sure to exclude? Only the Chinese. Then in 1904, the House made the Chinese Exclusion Act permanent. This act lasted for 60 long years. It was not until 1943 that this law was repealed. But it was only because of World War II when the United States needed to maintain a critical military alliance with China. U.S. enemies were pointing to the Chinese Exclusion Act as proof that the U.S. was anti-Chinese, and the U.S. had to erase that perception. However, Congress made no formal acknowledgement that these laws were wrong. The Chinese Exclusion Act was the first and only federal law in our history that excluded a single group of people from immigration on no basis other than their race. And the effects of this act produced deep scars on the Chinese American community. Families were split apart permanently. Without the ability to naturalize as citizens and to vote, the community was disenfranchised. Because immigration had been so severely restricted, few women could come, and the ratio of males to females was as high as 20-to-1. Many Chinese American males could not have families and were forced to die completely alone. If they did try to marry, they were forced to go abroad, and families were separated. The family of Jean Quan, mayor of Oakland, had been here legally since 1880. Her father went abroad to marry a woman in China in 1920, but had to leave her behind along with their children. When the Chinese Exclusion Act was repealed over 25 years later, his wife was finally able to come and have Jean in the United States, but the siblings did not know each other for decades. The Chinese, like my grandfather, did not have the legal right to become naturalized citizens. He had been here legally since 1904, but unlike non-Chinese immigrants, he was forced to register and carry a certificate of residence at all times for almost 40 years, or else be deported. He could only be saved if a white person vouched for him. These laws are why we ask for this expression of regret. Last October, the U.S. Senate did its part to write history by passing their own resolution of regret for these hateful laws. It did so unanimously with bipartisan support. And today, the House should also issue its expression of regret. It is for my grandfather and for all Chinese Americans who were told for 6 decades by the U.S. government that the land of the free wasn't open to them that we must pass this resolution. We must finally and formally acknowledge these ugly laws that were incompatible with America's founding principles. We must express the sincere regret that Chinese Americans deserve. By doing so, we will acknowledge that discrimination has no place in our society, and we will reaffirm our strong commitment to preserving the civil rights and constitutional protections for all people of every color, every race, and from every background. Thank you, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The lady reserves. Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, we have no other speakers on this side, so I'll reserve the balance of my time as well.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlelady from California.
I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from California, Representative Mike Honda.
Gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I, too, would like to add my thanks to the leadership, specifically Chairman Lamar. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 683, a resolution expressing the regret of the House of Representatives for the passage of laws that adversely affected the Chinese in the United States, including the Chinese Exclusion Act. A century and a half ago, the Chinese were used as cheap labor to do the most dangerous work, laying the tracks of our transcontinental railway and building the California Delta levees. They strengthened our nation's infrastructure, only to be persecuted when their labor was seen as competition and when the dirtiest work was done. In 1848, when gold fever spread across the Pacific Ocean, many thousands of young Chinese came in boats to Gold Mountain, to California. In 1861 to 1865, there was waged a civil war in this country. There were over 50 Chinese Americans who battled each other in this civil war, and that went unnoticed. In 1863, construction of the Transcontinental Railroad commenced. With the discovery of silver in Nevada in 1865, many of the white workers left the railroad to search for silver. To fill the labor shortage, Charles Crocker, one of the big four investors of the railroad and the man responsible for constructing the western portion of the railroad, began hiring Chinese immigrants. Crocker's famous justification was, they built the Great Wall of China, didn't they? For the promise of $25 to $30 a month, the new workers endured long hours and harsh winters in the Sierra Nevada mountains. While working in the Sierras, Chinese workers were hung in baskets over cliffs 2,000 feet above raging rivers to blast into the impenetrable granite mountain to make way for laying the tracks. Once they bored holes and stuffed them with dynamites, they had to be pulled back up before the fuse exploded, endangering the lives of everyone on both ends of the rope. And sometimes these poor souls in the baskets were not drawn up safely because there was no faith in the timing of the fuse. Hence the origin of the phrase, you ain't got a Chinaman's chance. By 1867, 90% of the workers were Chinese, and by 1869, over 11,000 workers were Chinese. On the National Historic Site of the Golden Spike at Promontory, Utah, where on May 10, 1869, the final spike was driven, sits a plaque commemorating the attainment and achievement of the great political objective of binding together by iron bonds the extremities of continental United States, a rail link from ocean to ocean. However, neither in Thomas Hill's famous painting nor in the historical photos of the last spike are the faces of the 11,000 Chinese workers visible. And one wonders, where were these 11,000 workers? Perhaps they were given the day off on that day. Though absent in these visual historical depictions, one more minute.
I would like to yield 1 more minute to the gentleman from California.
I'm recognized.
Thank you. Though absent in these visual historical depictions, the Chinese left an undeniable and indelible mark in the history of California and in the larger story of binding this country's ocean to ocean. Upon the railroad completion, the Chinese settled in California Delta to help with the levee construction, thus advancing California's agricultural development. The passage of anti-Chinese law illustrates the xenophobic hysteria of this country's shameful chapter of exclusion. We cannot vilify entire groups of people. We learned that because it is politically or economically expedient. The great thing about humanity is that we have the opportunity to learn from our mistakes. In closing, Mr. Speaker, I am pleased that this resolution is on the floor today. Acknowledging and addressing these injustices throughout our nation's history not only strengthens civil rights and civil justices, but doing so brings us closer to a more educated nation and a more perfect union. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Texas continues to reserve. Gentlelady from California.
I yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from American Samoa, Representative Eni Faleomavega.
Gentleman from American Samoa for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to extend and revise my remarks.
Without objection.
I also want to thank the gentleman from Texas, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Mr. Lamar Smith, for his leadership and support of this legislation, as well as my good friend Congressman Conyers, the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, for his support as well. I especially want to express my appreciation and thanks to the chairwoman of our Congressional Asia Pacific American Caucus, Ms. Judy Chu, not only as the chief sponsor of this legislation, but for her dynamic leadership in bringing this bill to the floor today. Speaker, I rise in support of House Resolution 683, a resolution of regret for the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. The Chinese Exclusion Act was the first major law restricting immigration to the United States to enforce a 10-year moratorium on Chinese immigrant laborers and denying naturalization to those who were already in the United States. Enacted on the premise that Chinese laborers, and I quote, endanger the good order of certain localities, the law was largely motivated by economic fears by our fellow Americans who felt that Chinese laborers were to blame for unemployment and the declining wages in the West. Through the Geary Act of 1892, the Chinese Exclusion Act was extended for another 10 years before becoming permanent in 1902, and it was only repealed by the Magnuson Act of 1943 when China became an ally of the United States during World War II. Even then, the new law only allowed 105 Chinese immigrants per year, a much lower quota than immigrants quotas from other countries and regions of the world. Large-scale Chinese immigration was only finally allowed again with the Immigration Act of 1965, some 80 years after the Chinese Exclusion Act. Like their counterparts from European countries, Chinese immigrants in the 19th century came to the United States in search of opportunities for a better life. Since the first wave of Chinese immigrants to the United States, Chinese American community has contributed greatly to the development of our nation, and it is a shame that these discriminatory practices and laws, fear-based laws, split up Chinese families and prevented them from decades from pursuing the American dream. For example, Chinese laborers made up the majority of the Central Pacific Railroad network workforce, and it connected the first transcontinental railroad through the Sierra Mountains into the western states, and of course that final spike was done in the state of Utah. The completion of the railroad with the help of these Chinese laborers would later mobilize other industries and pave the way for a more connected and prosperous America. But the Chinese Exclusion Act, Mr. Speaker, the first law restricting entry of an ethnic working group, stifled Chinese immigrants' ability to lend their skills to the betterment of our nation and become a part of the American family. Because of this law was validated by leaders in our nation, it gave credence to the underlying notion that certain groups did not deserve fair treatment in our nation. The policy sent a clear message that Chinese immigrants were not qualified for the American dream. Furthermore, it set a precedent for later policies against immigrant groups such as the National Origins Act of 1929, which barred Asian immigration, and our shameful policy of forcing some 100,000 Americans born in the United States but who happen to be of Japanese ancestry. This is one reason why I always admired our nation, Mr. Speaker, and our form of democracy, and that is it tries to correct its mistakes from the past. While our nation has come a long way since this legislation was enacted 130 years ago, let us continually be reminded in our diverse country to uphold the founding principle of our nation, that all men and women are to be treated equally and fairly under the law. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back and urge my colleagues to pass this bill.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlewoman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
And ladies recognized.
Today is historic. This is a very significant day in the Chinese American community. It is an expression that discrimination has no place in our society and that the promise of equality is available to all. This is only the fourth such apology in the last 25 years. In 1988, President Reagan signed the bill apologizing for the Japanese American internment during World War II. In 1993, Congress apologized to Hawaiians for the U.S.-led overthrow of their monarchy. In 2008, the House issued an apology to African Americans on behalf of the people of the United States for the wrongs committed against them and their ancestors who suffered under slavery and Jim Crow. This bill was a huge undertaking requiring the efforts of Chinese Americans and their supporters all across the nation. Without the dedication of countless community organizations and grassroots advocates from across the country, none of this would have happened. I thank them, and I thank all the Congress members from both sides of the aisle, including the 50 co-sponsors of the bill, and especially Chairman Lamar Smith for their support. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The lady yields back. Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I'll yield back the balance of my time as well.
Question is, will the House suspend the rules and agree to House Resolution 683? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the resolution is agreed to, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. Purpose does the gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 3668, the Counterfeit Drug Penalty Enhancement Act of 2012, as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 3668, a bill to prevent trafficking in counterfeit drugs.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Smith, and the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Chu, each will control 20 minutes, and the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on H.R. 3668 as amended, currently under consideration.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I thank Mr. Meehan of Pennsylvania and Ms. Sanchez of California for their work on this issue. This is a bipartisan, bicameral bill. Similar legislation sponsored by Senator Leahy was approved by the Senate last March by voice vote. This bill enacts penalties for trafficking in counterfeit drugs similar to those for trafficking in military goods or services as established in the National Defense Authorization Act, which Congress passed last December. Counterfeit military goods affect the credibility of the supply chains that support our national defense. And counterfeit drugs call into doubt the credibility of America's pharmaceutical legal drug supply. In both situations, the significant and multiple dangers to the public demand enhanced penalties. Counterfeit drugs are fake drugs. They may be contaminated, contain the wrong ingredient or no ingredient at all, or have the right active ingredient but the wrong dose. They are intentionally packaged to convince the consumer they are genuine. Counterfeit drugs are illegal and can be harmful to a person's health and even deadly. Counterfeit drugs present not only a financial loss to the manufacturer or mark holder, but also a real health risk to consumers. While current law technically includes counterfeit drugs, the law does not expressly prohibit trafficking in counterfeit drugs and carries a maximum penalty of only 10 years.